Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. I'm your host, John. It's been a while since I've done a voicemail episode, so I've got a couple of old voicemails that I've had for quite some time. Apologies to the people who left those that I'm going to try and reply to now. I've also got a couple of more recent ones that I'm going to reply to, and we'll get to that straight after the music. And our first call is from the Pink Phantom. Take it away.
Really enjoyed your episode on adding skills to OD&D. I've always thought an interesting idea for OD&D in particular, since they have sort of a kind of basic skills system kind of built in, rolling that D6 and getting a 1 or a 1 or a 2, depending on what you're trying to do, would be to just have the thief get a second D6. So, when he's listening at a door, he rolls 2d6. If there's a success on either one, that's a success. Or moving silently, picking pockets, whatever sort of thief skills you want to have available to them, based on what the DM, because this gives the DM, that same sort of rulings opportunity to say, okay, yeah, this is where being a thief applies, and even has the potential to expand to other classes if there's some sort of a cult doing some kind of ritual that maybe the cleric can roll to try to figure out what it is, or if they run across some runes or sigils on a wall or on a floor, maybe the magic user can figure out what it is. Maybe the fighter can diagnose an enemy's combat tactics or what they're trying to achieve or something like that. Just thought I'd chip that in.
Thanks very much. Greatly appreciated. Yeah, I think that sounds like a reasonable compromise and a way to do it. As I've said before, one of my favourite sort of OSR style games is Castles and Crusades, where it has a skill system in it, but effectively if the skill that you're trying to do, the task that you're trying to do, applies to your class, so it's something you'd be good at, like, as you said, a rogue trying to pick a lock or a wizard trying to unravel a dastardly ceremony, then you get to add your class level to it, as well as whatever attribute bonuses you've got, and you're trying to hit a target number in that game. And that really sort of reinforces the idea that as the characters go up in level, the class you've taken, the sort of speciality you have, if you will, really starts to pay off. Everyone sort of starts off at the same sort of level. Just adding 1 for like a character level doesn't really make a great deal of difference. But when that rogue gets to like 5th, 6th, 7th or above levels, and you sort of start adding that level modifier in, it really starts to pay off. And I think the rogue's been a very discussed sort of part of the OSR game, because, as you rightly say, it was the sort of first attempt to, like, I suppose, graft on a sort of ad hoc like skill system, albeit just related to certain sort of dungeony or rogue activities. But yeah, I think your manner of doing this would be a great compromise. If you wanted to bring in a little bit of sort of a skill system without having a whole massive system to bolt onto it, and you wanted to keep it simple. So thank you very much for suggesting that. It's greatly appreciated. Our next call is from Randy over at the Biggest Geekest podcast. If you've not listened to that, I highly recommend it. Take it away, Randy.
It's been a long time. Love your skills episode. I am a fan of skills in OSR games. FMAG is a good game. I love White Box. I found a new love for those old games, but I think they need a little bit more. I like your idea. I'm just like you. I think 3rd edition got it right with the roll high. I am ascending armor class guy. No interest in Thaco. I can do the math. Always have been able to. Heck, I teach math. It's not an issue.
Yeah, I feel the same about Thaco, to be honest, Randy. Like you say, the math's not hard. I don't make any claims to be great at maths, but it's not exactly difficult, is it? However, to me, sort of getting a higher roll, being better, just feels a little bit more intuitive to me, and it certainly seems that players, well, most of the players I've had, seem to sort of find it more intuitive to do that. But like you say, if people love Thaco, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Different strokes for different folks.
But I really do like some sort of skills. But like you, I don't want it overbearing. I don't want too much. I'm working on my own game, and I have an idea for skills that I think might be interesting. But it is a roll under. And that's kind of just a fascination holdover. I'm with you. Roll high is better. Who knows? Maybe I'll change it. But good episode. Keep up the good work. Take care, man. Hey, say hi to Hannah. Haven't heard from her in a long time. Bye.
Thanks very much, Randy. I'm glad you enjoyed the skills episode. Hopefully, at some point, I mean, I'm doing a new job at the moment, and I'm struggling to find the free time to actually fit in running my games, never mind recording podcast episodes and stuff like that. But hopefully things will settle down at some point and I can get back to a bit of a more regular schedule, assuming I've got anything to say, that is. But thank you very much. Yeah, I'll pass on your regards to Hannah. Obviously, you left your message before she put up a review of the D&D movie. But again, we're sort of gearing up for LARP season at the moment, so free time's at a bit of a premium. But hopefully we can get back to doing some joint episodes soon. And I look forward to seeing when you release it, or when it becomes available, your game and what your approach to skills is. So thank you very much. And our next call is from the man, the legend, Jason, over at Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Go ahead, Jason.
Hey, John, Jason here. Listen to the Tyranny of Dice. Yep, Easy D6 is pretty neat. I've not run it or played it. I've read it. I like what I've read. I like the luck dice thing that DM Scotty sells. It's slightly different than what's in there, but he has a little pamphlet he sells you can buy for like $2. And where you can adapt the luck dice to any game. And I like D6s too. I mean, Barbarians of Lemuria, one of my favorite games, is all D6s, right?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Easy D6 games. I'm sure you've guessed. I'm using it to run the sort of Wild West fantasy Archaeotech mashup that I'm doing at the moment as a campaign, and that seems to be working pretty well. There's a few things I've like house ruled, or I've changed, or stuff like that, or like I've added in a few optional rules where the game maybe doesn't cover things that I want to have in this game, you know, like things like purchasing equipment and stuff like that, which is very sort of hand-waved in it, which is absolutely fine, and it's a great system for one-shots and for conventions and stuff like that. And having just D6 being used makes it a very low entry, because everyone's got some D6s knocking around in board games and stuff like that, which isn't such a problem when I'm running most of my games online, because as you know, some of my players are in different countries and far around the UK and stuff like that, so it's not possible for us to get together. But when I'm going to be taking it to a convention, it's great just to be able to shove a big old bag of cheap D6 into my rucksack and not have to worry about taking loads of stuff. I just have to have a small book and some D6s, and maybe a few tokens if I want, although those aren't really necessary. But yeah, I'm finding it a really enjoyable game at the moment.
I'm actually looking at running a luchador game, like the El Santo movies, El Santo and Blue Demon movies, where you're fighting demons or you're fighting bad guys part of the time doing a mystery, and then you're in the ring doing wrestling the other part.
I've got to say, Jason, although I'm sort of peripherally aware of the films that you've mentioned, it's not really a genre I've looked into particularly. Maybe I'll have to give that a look when I get some time.
And honestly, the two systems that are built to do that are Hero system, which uses D6, or Unisystem, which uses D10s. We may go with Hero system because Lucha Libre Hero comes with the cut-down version of the rules and it's got everything you need in there. So I don't know. But yeah, D6s are cool. No issues there. Plus, you can run your Star Wars game. Your I forget what it's called now, but that updated D6 Star Wars game that you talked about a while back. So keep up the great work, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks very much for the call, Jason. Always appreciate getting a call from yourself. And yet, those game ideas you're talking about sound really cool. And I've got to admit, I hadn't considered that, yeah, I could run my Star Wars game as well. And all I'd need were the D6s and the stuff that I've already got in my rucksack for Easy D6. So that is another big tick in the plus column for me. So thank you for bringing that to my somewhat short-termly impaired memory. Thanks again, dude, and I'll catch you soon. Our next call is from Ricardo Giro, and I apologise if I've mispronounced your name, but please go ahead.
Hey John, Ricardo here. Sometimes I post as shut up at us, but nearly not as much as I should, to be honest.
No need to apologise. I know that feeling well, of thinking, oh yeah, I really need to post like my latest Dungeon 23, I need to put up some podcast episodes, or a YouTube video, or even just like take more part in the sort of Discord communities or online communities that I'm in. But sometimes you just can't find the time, you just got to do the best that you can do. And if you can't manage to post as much as you want, sometimes you just have to accept that's just how things go. Anyway, please go ahead.
Anyways, I was listening to the latest episode of your podcast with the other speakers, and the things you talked about all really clicked, right? I'm talking from a viewpoint of someone with far less experience playing and running TTRPGs of any kind. I've played, or I've run, I guess, a lot of 5e back when it came out. Not the bloated mess that it is right now, but now I don't think I could run it anymore because of all the stuff that's attached to it and all the attitudes that most players have.
Yes, it is an unfortunate thing that happens with a lot of tabletop RPGs, not just 5th edition, that as the editions go along, they tend to become a little bit more bloated and a little less streamlined than they are at the very start. I've recently been looking at a game called Bugbears and Borderlands, which is essentially someone trying to take a simplified version of 5th edition and sort of reimagine it in the style that Mulvey did for the original old D&D and sort of create like a beginner's or a simplified version. And I'm very much enjoying that because it gets rid of a lot of that system bloat and streamlines things down a bit. So I might think about running that in the future at some point.
That usually play the game, but that's talk for another time. Something you talked about was that some games don't have really good like GM advice, and I think some games don't even justify or clearly explain some of the underlying mechanics of the game itself. One example I have is a game called Karen, which I love, but the game says that the character advancement is diegetic, right? And it leaves it at that. And what that means is that the characters advance in story, in fiction, but you don't get like more strength or intelligence or whatever, and that was super weird to me, and it took me quite a few months to put that in my head.
Yeah, I think that can be a danger when someone's writing a system, because obviously the person who was writing the system knows exactly what they mean. They've been in that sort of headspace of doing that system for so long, and sometimes it can be, and I've had this myself when I'm writing, sometimes it can become easy to lose sight of the fact that anyone coming into that system cold won't have all the background knowledge and all the benefits of the stuff that you have in your head, so it needs to be explained in a little more detail, and I think it can be quite easy to lose sight of that, unfortunately.
Also, one other thing is that I totally agree that you gain experience from playing the game, but that's sometimes hard because, for example, I live in a small city in a small country in Europe that doesn't really have a long-lasting tradition with TTRPGs. And so the most what most people think of as a TTRPG is D&D 5e. New people that look for RPGs are going to be taken by 5e, basically. I've successfully run a few games for some people that weren't really interested or had never thought about RPGs, using something like Sailors on the Starless Sea for the funnel for DCC, and it was super successful. But I really struggle with the what do we do now? Like setting up a campaign, because I've never done that outside of published material for 5e. Excuse me. I've thought of using basic fantasy RPG or maybe just reading through BX and running the old, Into the Unknown, Keep on the Borderlands, stuff like that. But I would like an opinion. Like when you try to bring people that are new to the hobby, and you manage to entice them with the kind of gameplay of like using what's in your backpack and your creativity as a player, what do you do next? Like how can I convince them to stay, kind of? Thanks.
I think you make a valid point there. If someone is new to TTRPGs, it can be sometimes difficult to sort of get across why we have such enthusiasm for the hobby. Now, when it comes to initially getting people into TTRPGs, I found one thing that can be useful is to use a property or a world that they're familiar with. So I've done this with Star Wars and things like that, because if people aren't into TTRPGs, they've probably heard of Star Wars and they at least know the basics of it, so they can sort of work out what sort of things they can do in the Star Wars framework, and that just makes one less barrier for them actually getting into the game. And once you've used that Star Wars or whatever as an on-ramp and they're into TTRPGs, and they know a little bit about how TTRPGs work, then maybe I broach sort of something that's less well known and see if they fancy that, and hopefully they've got the grounding to be able to go on to other games. In terms of what you do next once you've got someone into TTRPGs, and I know this sounds like a bit of a cop-out answer, so I do apologise for that, but I find one of the simplest things to do is just to ask the players. And what I tried to do is I tried to set up like some form of conflicts in the game, but also ask the players about what sort of things they'd be interested in. So, for instance, I had in my recent campaign, we normally do like the session 0, and they're not mandatory by any means, but I just find a session 0 where you sit down and you talk about how the game's going to go. It really helps you to get an idea of what bits of the game and the background influence the player characters. So in my recent campaign I mentioned there was going to be like noble families in this weird sort of Wild West fantasy world, and one of the players said he'd be interested in, the sort of conflicts between the noble families and potentially crime families fighting it out with each other. So I can instantly just write down like, all right, they're interested in that. So I've got at least one player who's interested in that plot line, so I should probably use it in the game. So that would be my main answer. Speak to the players and find out what sort of thing they're interested in, and then bring that into your game in a way that's appropriate for your campaign world and your established genre, and then hopefully that will draw them in. And obviously if you get like 2 or 3 players who are all like, oh yeah, we'd all be interested in that as well, then you've already hooked people in, and hopefully because their initial interest is in the subject matter, that will then sort of bleed through into them being interested in the game as a whole.
Sorry for all the messages, John, but you spoke about some very interesting topics.
No need to apologise. I love getting messages from people and being able to respond to them in little episodes like this. Like I say, I do apologise to everyone who's left messages. I've been a bit slack with putting out episodes recently. As I said earlier in this episode, free time's at a bit of a premium at the minute, but I'm trying to get back on that horse. But no, I love it when people leave messages. The more the merrier as far as I'm concerned.
About the whole thing about getting experience, someone talked about, you don't have to use the whole book. You can just mix and match the rules you want. And that's true, but you also need to, not mess around with the rules without first knowing if you should, if they are like a core part of the game, if messing with those rules or removing them will somehow ruin the rest of the rule set. And to do that, you need a lot of experience, right? You can't just you shouldn't just start messing around with rules just as soon as you start playing the game, which is where I'm at right now. That's why I'm thinking of just picking up basic fantasy RPG or actually BX and just running it as it is, like getting against the Cult of the Reptile God or something, and just finding 3 or 4 people and play that.
I think you're absolutely right there, and as I said earlier, it can be easy to lose sight of that. I mean, I've run, without trying to brag or anything, I've run like quite a lot of TTRPGs, and it's very easy to forget that if you're not as experienced with GMing or running games, it can be quite difficult to tweak or alter rules without affecting other parts of the system. And even if you have got a lot of experience as a GM, there are some sets of rules where they're so closely interlinked that changing one thing can have unforeseen circumstances for other parts of the system. It's one of the reasons why I like very simple systems, or ones that have sort of separate subsystems, because I know I can tweak the bits I want without necessarily affecting everything else. But you are absolutely correct. As far as I'm concerned, the best way to run a system is to get it at first, run it as it is, and then once you've got a lot of experience with it and you're more confident with how different bits of the system work, then maybe you can start tweaking it. And as I've said in a few podcasts, I made the mistake recently when we first started our last campaign, and we started off with the Worlds Without Number system. That effectively has 2 tiers of play. There's the normal sort of standard sort of old school D&D level tier of play, and then there's like a heroic fantasy tier of play which adds a load of extra stuff on. Now, we were quite keen to do some heroic fantasy, so we jumped straight into using the heroic fantasy rules without me being entirely familiar with the basics of the system, and I just found it an absolute slog to run that because I wasn't familiar with it all and we were adding lots of extra stuff on. So I'd try to run before I could walk. And that eventually led to us changing the system to use EasyD6, which is a far simpler system. And I probably will get round to trying Words Without Number again, but I will start off at the sort of basic level, run that for at least probably 1 or 2 campaigns until I'm confident with it before I try out the heroic tier stuff again. So even though I've got a lot of experience with running tabletop RPGs, you can still easily make that mistake of trying to run before you can walk.
It's been tough because some people, like I see people playing 5e being completely miserable, saying that they like the turns take too long, everyone like has to do their 150 damage or something, and everyone's on their phones. And then when you introduce them to a game where the turns are basically like 10 to 15 seconds, or they can get to that, and people love it, and then like they don't come back. It's strange. It's honestly kind of disheartening trying to find players where I'm at because I find so many people in that situation. Thanks.
Yes, I think it's one of the unfortunate sort of realities of the hobby that bringing new people in or finding regular players can be quite difficult. And I don't think there's any single one solution to that, unfortunately. I consider myself quite lucky at the moment because I have half a dozen or so regular players that I tend to go to when I'm pitching a new game, and they're normally pretty interested. We've all gamed together quite some time, and it just takes that weight off. But I do remember a period of time when I was constantly looking for new players, advertising in sort of online Facebook groups and forums and stuff like that. Then you get the inevitable player drop off, or people who say they're interested but then can't make loads of sessions, and it can be very disheartening. Unfortunately, as I say, there's no one solution to this problem, and all I can really suggest is to sort of keep plugging away and trying to get people interested, like it sounds like you're doing at the moment. It sounds like you're doing very good work when it comes to that, and hopefully at some point you will end up like I'm fortunate enough to have, with a sort of stable of regular players that you can go to. And it's part of the reason why I run most of my games online now, because I come from a very small town as well, where the TTRPG sort of following isn't that great. But because I can now run stuff online, and you've got a whole vast sort of arena of players all around the world that you can potentially pull on, it makes it a lot easier to find players, in my opinion. So there we are. I hope that's been some help to you. So that's it for this episode. Thank you to all of our callers, the Pink Phantom, Randy at Bigger Skeekus, Jason from Nerds RPG Varietycast, and Ricardo Giro. Thank you very much for your calls, guys. And again, I apologise, it's taken me a while to put out this episode. Hopefully I'll be able to start putting things out more regularly in the future, but I've said that a few times, and then, work and real life have unfortunately got in the way. But that's just the way things go. You've got to roll with the punches. However, if you're listening to this episode and you'd like to be featured in a future one, then you can get in touch a number of different ways. You can leave us a voicemail message using either Anchor or Spotify for podcasters, as it's now called, or you can leave us a voicemail message on SpeakPipe. There'll be links to both of those in the description below. Or if you want, you can send an email, either a text email or with a sound file attached, to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. I really do enjoy listening to your calls and responding to them in episodes like that. So if you want to get involved, drop us a line. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. And whatever you're playing out there, whenever you're playing it, take care and have fun. We'll see you soon. Lock or a wizard to unravel.